Earthlings of the world unite. Let me get rid of Peter Singer. He's not welcome yet, but we call him this Peter Singer honest to the core, and so that's what we're going to talk about, in the sense that Peter Singer was very kind of honest about his position, and he's maintained his honesty. It's other things that are going on in the movement which catches our attention. But first of all, we'll concentrate on what kind of piqued our interest, which went to Benny, really, in the sense that you noticed this article and shared it around. So what was the issue that you wanted to raise about the article, Benny? And welcome to Andy and Benny.
This is an article by Wayne.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so I just found it a little bit surprising, given some of the way Wayne normally talks about animal rights, and he seems to be, really valorizing Peter Singer here as being involved in the animal rights movement and kind of supporting animal rights and furthering animal rights. And I think what we're going to discuss really is how Singer wouldn't make that claim himself. We don't think. It's kind of something that's being frustrating.
And when you say he, it's the name there that people might be able to see. It's Wayne Hsiung. So he's what is he? DXE, but what is his official title? Or does he have one, or founder or something?
Well, I'm not sure if he's still with DXE, actually. This was on his own Substack. Yeah, and then when I tried to find it on his own page, I couldn't see it. So I didn't really share it yet myself on any social media. I just messaged a few people for their thoughts on it, including yourself, Roger. So
yes, I know, and I roped you into doing this then. Yeah, so but so this is Wayne Hsiung, ex of possibly DXE, and
sure.
I mean, obviously, it's interesting because he will talk about animal rights, but he won't talk about veganism. Right. And so I had a quick look at the DXE website, thinking that he was still there. And I could find any mention of veganism. And of course, famously, DXE put out a pamphlet called Boycott Veganism. Right. And so I think they take the line that our members are most likely to be vegan, but we think that activism should be the moral baseline and not veganism. Right. And so I think that's the line they kind of take. And we'll see. I think what goes on really is that Wayne Hsiung has kind of done some little sneaky attacks on veganism for years. For example, I don't know whether you remember the interview we did with James Cromwell on the bus when they were going to a pig farm. Now, James Cromwell is the lead actor of Babe, the film, and in the interview, which is still available on Facebook, you'll see Cromwell talking about artificially inseminating sows in order to have the piglets at the right size for the filming dates, because they only had 3 weeks to work with each pig, and so they had to keep. I don't know how many sows they talked about, but they had to keep artificially inseminating the sows in order to create the piglets at the right time for the filming. Okay. And so they had 3 weeks. And then he also says that he wears leather shoes and he eats eggs. So Sean has always kind of been quite open to the fact that veganism can be a bit loose, is a bit kind of Leonardi. And we'll see that in a minute, because he starts talking about the Paris exception. But first of all, this is the intro. So this is Wayne Hsiung talking about Peter Singer, who is, he says he's about to retire, but he's also doing a world tour promoting 50 years of animal liberation.
Farewell tour.
Yeah, there is actually, he's doing a live stream, and he's doing it right now, funny enough. So we're competing with DXE, so we're going to lose probably, but. So this is where he starts, and then he says, speaking of Singer, check out his powerful op-ed this week in the LA Times. It makes a case for animal rights being the most important moral problem facing the world today. So I've actually got a copy of that, but I'll have to just drop that down to find it for you, which is here.
That's no problem.
Boom. Okay, let me get that back up on the screen. I'm going to have to do a little bit of juggling with this, people, so bear with me. So I put in a search for animal rights on this thing. So this is Peter Singer's op-ed that Wayne Hsiung is recommending that people tune into. And there's two mentions of rights. Now, the language here, Andy, is really interesting, isn't it? It says, first of all, 50 years ago, my first article arguing that it's wrong to treat animals as we do appeared in the New York Review of Books. 2 years later, my book, Animal Liberation, was published, subsequently to be credited with triggering the modern animal rights movement. So he's been a little bit careful, and you mentioned the word, distancing a little bit there.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if anyone's familiar with a guy called Peter Hoyt. He does basically language analysis. It's mainly for like the police and stuff like that. Statement analysis. If he was to read that, he'd say Peter has put as much distance between him and the animal rights movement as he physically can. It's not, I am very proud that my work has inspired this. It's, yeah, they keep putting this stupid title on me and I've got to mention it. That's, it couldn't be any, he's not owning that at all. That's, I've got to mention it. It's so distant. There's no pride there whatsoever. You'd think if that was something, the father of animal rights, I created this. I mean, look at some of the things from Donald Watson saying, look, I don't want anyone to remember me until I'm dead. And I want them to remember that I started potentially the greatest social justice movement ever. That's how you'd want to be remembered. Not, yeah, I've got to talk about this again. Like, which is kind of the impression he's given there. It's so much distance. Yeah, and he's wrote this. His words, isn't it? We talk about journalism, but these are his words.
Yeah, well, and also the book is called Animal Liberation. It's not called Animal Rights. And then the second mention in this entire article is this one. The idea that animals should have rights has gone from being ridiculed to being wildly held. So he's clearly there talking about legal rights, I would say, Benny, because he's saying should have rights, that idea. But then his next sentence is, in many countries, safeguarding animal welfare is seen as an important governmental or government responsibility. So there's a bit of a kind of weirdness there that, he's talking about legal rights and then he immediately switches to animal welfare, which is kind of not what a rights person would kind of do. And so, again, I think he's kind of struggling to kind of get in the word a little bit, and yeah, I don't know. It's interesting because I was going to show you this thing here, which is The Longest Struggle, and it's an account of the North American animal rights thing. And have you heard of Henry Spearer? Henry Spearer. So in 1973, he this is how kind of far all this issue goes back. He kind of does a course with Singer. So Singer has just published this very kind of groundbreaking article. Then he does a kind of Earthling Ed type module in a university, and Henry Spearer goes to it. And the module is based on what would become animal liberation. And so this inspires Spearer, who's a left-wing activist, to start a group based on Peter Singer's work. And might not surprise you, he calls it Animal Rights International. Okay. So again, we've got this weird situation right from the start that there's this confusion being created because presumably in this module, he probably explained that he wasn't an animal rights advocate. He was a utilitarian. He probably had a little bit of a pop at Reagan along the way too, and yet his chief student goes and translates that to animal rights. So I always thought that was kind of fascinating. And then another thing that is too is, let me just show you this, which is I've got to stop the screen again.
Well, I mean, in exactly the same way, though, although she's obviously like a close second, Ingrid is essentially the same thing. She's a huge believer of his work and everything else. And she then adds the words animal rights to the sentences, even though they don't belong there. This is the part I don't understand. If you've read that book as many times as you have, and you've had conversations with him as many times as Ingrid has, you really should understand his position. Like, and if I was Peter, when he'd be ringing up, I'd be like, look, what's the point in us having a conversation? You don't listen. You can't read. Like, I don't know what more I can do. That's the part that it must be frustrating, because like he's had these conversations for nearly 50 or over 50 years if you go back before the book, and people are still conflating what he says and what he wrote. I mean, how many reissues has there got to be before people read the first chapter?
Unless we're taking language too seriously, and we ought to be a bit loose about it. I mean, you know, in the kind of Kim Stallwood sense of when he talks about animal rights, he'll actually say animal rights broadly defined, meaning that he will kind of incorporate animal welfare into animal rights. For example, his first job was with Compassion in World Farming, which he describes as his first animal rights job, which of course, from our point of view, isn't true. Sentientism. I interviewed Singer recently. Interested to see what you think. Yes, we shall certainly look at that.
Yeah,
to coincide with the book launch. So that's going to be interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so just the point that I was making was, if you look at what's on the screen now, the Fable of the Fox. So this is Singer responding to an early review of Animal Liberation. It goes to show how kind of slow things are, but I think the United States release of Animal Liberation was 1976. And I think then that the review, in fact, it will probably say when the review was. Animal Liberation, a critique, but it doesn't say when it was. But so this guy, Michael Fox, critiques Animal Liberation. And so Singer then, the following year, so we were up to 1978 by then. It's not exactly the age of social media, is it? You know, where everything happens on the same day, kind of thing. This is like taking 3 years. Yeah.
Well, I suppose saying that, without the internet, it probably took him a while to even be shown the critique. It's not like, you know, someone would have emailed it to him the next morning, is it? He'd have had to get a copy physically handed to him or sent to him to even read it.
Yeah, well, that wouldn't have been too hard in the sense that it was in academia at the time. So I would have thought that wouldn't be too bad.
But then again, I suppose if it's as groundbreaking as it was, he'd have probably had quite a few bits of mail to sift through.
Yeah, I suppose he would. Now, so Benny, this is kind of part of the problem that Singer's had, and he's had it right from the immediate publication of Animal Liberation, and so this is the bit that I think is the most important passage. Why is it surprising that I have little to say about the nature of rights? It would only be surprising to one who assumes that my case for animal liberation is based upon rights, and in particular the idea of extending rights to animals. This is not my position at all. I have little to say about rights because rights are not important to my argument. My argument is based on the principle of equality, blah, 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 blah. And so he goes through then what his position is. And then the last line, I regret that I did allow the concept of rights to intrude into my work so necessarily at this point. It would have avoided misunderstanding had I have not made this concession to popular moral rhetoric. And so he's kind of like basically really saying that he's kind of made a mistake in animal liberation by talking about, you know, by actually using the word rights, I think. And so do you think if he was a bit more careful, Benny, we wouldn't have the confusion that has now lasted for how many, 50 years? If he'd have been more careful writing animal liberation in the first place?
Yeah, I think if it's at all, then there wouldn't be any kind of reviews mentioning it. But I think people still onto him and they'll be expecting. the book to be about. He's kind of right in a way about, you know, there's a lot of popular rhetoric about it. And like you were saying, with the two kind of understandings of rights, that more general one where anyone thinks anything in the animal movement is about rights, and more about what animal rights actually do against, you know, about individual animals having rights, and that kind of no trespass sign around animals to maintain kind of integrity of them and everything like that. So I think it would still be misunderstanding.
Let's see this one. I mean, my response to that would be that we talk about 1978, and I'm not quite sure there was a great popular rhetoric of animal rights at the time, certainly not in relation to other animals. I mean, we're still talking about several years before Reagan is published in 1983. So he's kind of got the field to himself, really. Sensitism. I heard singers say recently that he's comfortable with rights as a general public term for the pro-animal movement, but in a philosophical sense, he is clear that he's not rights focused.
That's his consistent position, isn't it? Like, literally those words.
Yeah, we've got a bit of film with him saying virtually that.
Really do you not think, like, going back to 1975, that the fact that Singer had multiple interpretations of rights and could differentiate between them is a bit similar now to when vegans use the word cruelty. They've got a couple of interpretations of it which work, and the public have got one. And this is why it doesn't work, because you're expecting them to see it from your point of view, and they don't. They see it from theirs. And so now he spent the last 50 years trying to tell everyone this, and it's kind of like, this is what the point we're making about some of this language. If the public don't get it, you're just going to spend forever explaining why they should get it, rather than we should just avoid it to begin with, and it would save all the problems. And I think, like, going back to 1975, if he could have took the word rights out of the beginning and not mentioned it, he would have done to save that. But I don't think it would have stopped all of the misinformation and everything else. No, I think people just like to piggyback off others, use the expression like they do. It's much easier for them to believe in Peter Singer as this brilliant Jesus, so to speak, because it means they haven't got to do as much. He's going to fix it. He's going to solve it. He's wrote the book that's going to change everyone's mind. We've just got to sit back and wait for it to happen. That's what people do. We see it with all sorts of people. We see it now.
It's an interesting point, that kind of parallel between the two ideas, that if you end up using somebody else's language, you're going to end up being in trouble, and that's kind of what we see with abuse and cruelty and stuff.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, and I think that's possibly what he was dealing with.
Yeah,
and has been ever since.
I think we need to make an addition to this. This is from Joanna. To all animal rights activists, vegans here, we obviously mean with animal rights that animals get constitutional rights to live and being protected and not get tortured and killed, etc. So that's the second part of it, I would suggest. Okay. And so what Reagan would say is that not that they should get them, which is the language that... say again, you cut out there, Benny.
Yeah, that would be the philosophical rights that Singer rejects.
No, well, this wouldn't be, would it? This is the legal rights here. So what Reagan is suggesting is that other animals have rights, not that they should be given rights. The only thing that should be given to them are legal rights. They already have moral rights. And so in the famous speech in '89, he said that it's the obligation of the law, doesn't he, to kind of codify moral rights into legal rights. I think he says that twice, I think, in that speech, you know?
Yeah. It's about the rights that they already have and have always had, just being respected. It's not about handing them anything.
Well, legal rights would be kind of, in a sense, given, because
but that would come afterwards, obviously. Yeah, no,
afterwards, this is the kind of thing that you have to get enough people, including politicians, to agree that other animals have rights.
He doesn't think they have to have moral rights.
Yeah, I think you're cutting out a little bit there, Benny, but I think you're saying that they have moral rights. Is that what you said?
Singer doesn't believe that animals have moral rights.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
In a philosophical sense.
And so going back to the confusion caused by Singer's kind of alleged mistake in a way, this is quite interesting because this is chapter 1 of Animal Liberation. And so this is where he starts the book, and he does start talking about rights of animals straight away. And the reason he does that, because he wanted to talk about Mary Wollstonecraft, who is a feminist, who wrote a kind of famous treatise saying that women have rights, and she called it The Vindication of the Rights of Women. This is 1792. And then there was a response to that, kind of almost like taking the mickey out of it, by I think it was a politician in the end. I think it was a British politician. He ended up being outed as Thomas Taylor. Oh, he was a distinguished Cambridge philosopher, according to this. And basically, he wrote a vindication of the rights of brutes. Okay, and so Singer wanted to kind of, it's a little bit of almost like a bit of a quirky kind of story to start the book. And I think so that's why that's in there. But it does mean then that mistake is right at the start of the book, you know, and in a sense he's kind of paid a heavy price for that mistake for the last 50 years, because he's had to explain, as Sentism said over and over again, well, I'm not a rightist philosophically, and he does say, well, in popular rhetoric, okay, you know, and all that, but he's still happier talking about rights in the legal right sense. He's never comfortable talking about moral rights, and I suppose the fact that now here we go. Guess who's here? So hello, reasonable vegan. What is a moral right? Well, it's interesting because it raises the question of where do rights come from, and there are different answers to that question, you know, because obviously for some people it would come from the divine. Other people it's the idea of natural rights, and Reagan would talk about natural rights. A more kind of liberal idea is that rights are a social construct. I'm quite sympathetic towards that idea because it fits in with sociology, and so in that sense, rights are an idea; they don't exist in nature. I always say that rights, in this sense, are like the speed limit. The speed limit doesn't exist in nature, but they do exist in society. Okay, and they're also enforced by law as well. So you've got police officers who will enforce this sign saying 30 on your street, which in a weird way doesn't mean anything. It's just totally, you know, constructed by society. So there's all that. So where to go next? I think we ought to go probably back to the thing where we started, maybe, and go back to that 3 waves thing, maybe, Benny, which I think we wanted to do. So let me stop the screen, start again by doing this. Where are we? There we go. Yeah, it's a bit of a cack-handed way of doing it, but I don't know any other way.
So I think Singer finds it with me really right.
Are you getting much of what Benny's saying?
No,
Andy?
no, I was going to say I missed all of that last one.
Can you repeat that, Benny?
I was just saying, Singer finds it a headache, really, and I'm sure he regrets putting the rights in there at all. Yeah.
Yes, I think so, and
I definitely get that impression. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, but the point is, if you take something like let's go down to where we want to be. This is the 3 ways of animal rights. If you take, for example, what's suggested as Peter, one of his main supporters, as it says here, and this is true in the sense that they've always promoted animal liberation. and it's the only philosophy book. There used to be a couple, I think, but it's the only philosophy book that they now sell, because obviously not many groups are selling books at all now. So there used to be a couple more. I don't think Tom Reagan was ever sold by.
Not that I could find on their website, according to the way.
No, but I mean, even in the past, I don't think.
Yeah. Certainly never on their website ever. No, not at all. It's not even just the fact that it's the only book that they sell. It's the promotion that it receives as well. Like, go and type Peter Singer's name into their search bar on their blog and see how many times it comes up. Because putting a book on your website is one thing, but the amount of times it's actively promoted and talked about is insane. It really is. It's crazy. Like, it's in the film, but the comparison to, say, a search for Tom Reagan's name that barely features on the website.
Well, it was 1, wasn't it, compared with
117? I think, 117 versus 1. Like, that's not just the book on the store. That's active promotion. That's marketing. I mean, I wish someone could promote my film 117 times on their thing. That'd be great.
And especially if it was as big as Peter, I suppose.
That's it.
So she says, now this is where Sean is saying that Ingrid Newkirk, herself, has long advocated Singer's work. So as I said, it's been the feature, but also she doesn't tell the truth about it. She said it's an animal rights book, and even got the phrase, if you only buy one animal rights book ever, it should be this one, right? Now, it must have been the case. It must have been the case that in the early years, Singer must have said to Ingrid Newkirk, my book isn't an animal rights book, so that description of it is wrong, right? And so either they didn't have that conversation, which, given the fact that he's complained about being called a rightist so often, that it's hard to believe, or she took no notice, or he gave up, I suppose.
Because I could almost guarantee that conversation happened when they were doing the Counterpoint article. There's no way that I don't think that subject came up, because I mean she was kind of coming from the welfare point of view. They must have had this conversation before that article and stuff to even get to that idea. Because she was kind of the counter argument. Like, she knew the position she was holding, and she even talked about how she didn't really feel comfortable doing it. So, like, she must have known, even if this conversation with Singer had never happened, she definitely must have known the difference, because she talks about it and wrote an article about it and got corrected quite well within the article. Like, it's there. This is the part I don't understand. There can't be this much ignorance. She must know full well what she's doing and just doesn't care.
Well, that's one interpretation of it. In fact, back in the day, I think it must have been the early 90s, I had a petition asking Peter to alter the description of animal liberation. It was never sent in, and I don't even know how to find it anymore either. So it kind of failed, as many petitions often do, folks. So petitions are not particularly useful, and mine wasn't either. So going back to this then. Wayne Hsiung is saying that only Ingrid Newkirk, his opinion, rivals Singer's impact in the movement. And then this thing about how they used to, because you were picking this out, Andy, this fact that they actually shipped out the book free to people.
Yeah, it just further cements what I just said. We're not just talking about the fact that it's a book on a website. We're talking about actively going above and beyond to make sure that that's the book that influences people.
And then he says, if you look back at animal rights history, we can see 3 distinct waves, which were all triggered by Singer's work. Because obviously no mention of Tom Reagan here. And then he's kind of quoting the first 2 paragraphs of his book. Well, that's interesting, because that's not the first 2 paragraphs of chapter 1. It's maybe the preface that he's quoting there. So that's actually quite a nice cover, isn't it, for the first one? The one I've got is.
I was going to say I've not seen that cover before. I don't think.
No, I haven't. It must have been the North American cover. And then what's the other bit that we wanted to? Oh yeah, and so this is where we then get the fact that we're into kind of Leonard territory now, in the sense that because Wayne Hsiung is not keen on veganism being the moral baseline, then he's obviously quite keen on the animal rights philosopher Peter Singer talking about eating other animals in certain circumstances. So he talks about the parasite exception here, which is essentially what's going to come up in the film, where Alex O'Connor, of all people, kind of says to Singer, "So you'd eat the cheese?" And he said, "Yes, I would in that situation," and all that. And so,
do you not think that Singer should have said, "Hang on, if we were on a train, you would have as well, wouldn't you?" The train obviously makes a big difference. If we're on a train, there's no other option. But yeah, it's. But again, to reiterate, this has been the position that Singer has maintained throughout. Like he's not like he used to say this and now he's saying this. This has always been his consistent view. He's always maintained it, and he's always repeated it over and over again. And he's been interviewed how many times? He's done how many world tours? He's never changed his stance.
This as well. He's referred to rights as a convenient political shorthand before, so he does that quite a bit in that sense. I just think it's quite interesting that obviously if you've got somebody who is, with Wayne Hsiung, the kind of boycott veganism kind of person, well, obviously, Francione's not going to be his favorite philosopher because he's going to take a strict, veganism is the moral baseline, which is what Hsiung wants to challenge. Whereas Singer's not going to take that. He's because he calls himself a flexible vegan. He's called himself a flexitarian sometimes. And he even said in one interview that sometimes you could have the luxury of a non-vegan meal. Right. Now, obviously, the animal rights response to that is transfer it into human rights context and then think how kind of, grotesque that sounds a little bit. So I'm going to switch to the film now, Andy, and so actually starts with me, but that's not on purpose, honest folks. Let's see if it does start at the right place. Look at all the animal groups that still sell books, for example. You'll be hard pressed to find a Tom Reagan book, and you won't find the case for animal rights. So the fundamental, groundbreaking statement of rights-based animal rights is not part of our movement. Peter Singer's Animal Liberation is, and that's a non-rights book. Singer says quite openly that he's not an animal rightist, and that he regrets framing animal liberation in terms of rights.
Although people very frequently describe me as an animal rights advocate, as you just did, and that's fine from the point of view of taking a political stance. People will know what side I'm on, where I am. Philosophically, I'm not an animal rights advocate.
If you order a meal at a restaurant and it comes with cheese on top or something, and you've got the choice between sending it back and saying, give me what I asked for, or just kind of shrugging your shoulders and eating it, it might be best to just shrug your shoulders and eat it, because in front of your friends, you don't want to make it seem like a difficult thing to do. Is that something that you've said in the
Yeah,
past?
it probably is something that I've said, yes, and that is consistent with the kinds of things that I think about.
So you would just eat the cheese?
In that case, yes.
I can't say with any confidence that it's wrong to bring animals into existence, give them good lives, and then kill them in a way that causes them no suffering. And that's what I mean by humanely killed, by the way. And I think that can happen. Again, it doesn't happen standardly at commercial slaughterhouses, but it can happen.
Yes.
He makes it very clear he doesn't think it's animal use per se that is problematic. What Peter says in Animal Liberation is it's the treatment of animals that's problematic. I think it is terrible that someone who is referred to as the father of the animal rights movement is saying that it's a morally defensible position to eat animals that have been, quote, humanely, end quote, raised or slaughtered. I think that's nonsense.
Whilst there are a number of digs at Peter Singer in this film, I would like to make the point that in his defence, he has always been consistent with his views. He's always maintained and in his own way defended his position, and the problem isn't really him. It's everyone else who misinterprets, misrepresents, or even flat out lies about his work, what it says or what he stands for. I actually get the impression he's fed up with having a philosophy he fundamentally disagrees with thrust upon him, time and time again, year after year. There's only so many times you can declare your position to have it projected as the opposite. So maybe you should stop doing it. Eh, Ingrid?
Right.
I don't remember the meow in the film.
Yeah, no, yeah. It's been added, I edited that in. You know, this is why in Animal Liberation he says that because of his position, he can't really see moral objection to free range egg production, right? And so he's kind of basically saying that if everything is right, you know, and obviously it caused controversy in, I think it was the 1990s, because Lee Hall, who's in your film, really criticized this, was that Singer came out with a replaceability thesis that if other animals were killed painlessly and then another one was created to replace that other animal and had a better life or the same type of life and then also killed painlessly, then not there was no kind of moral issue going on there. And in fact, it would be a good if the second other animal was you know, had a better life than the first, you know. So again, it's kind of not really the way. I mean, I think it's it might be the way that a reasonable vegan in the chat might see things, but it's not the way that animal rights people kind of see things, which is, you know, a bit more fundamental. But that, I think, is the clue to why animal liberation is much more popular and known in the movement than Reagan's book. I mean, Reagan, this is the 2004 with you know, with the new preface. It's actually quite sad to read this in the sense that he thought that he'd started a rights-based movement, and he even says in the preface, you know, how wrong could I be, kind of thing, right? And so this is a question whether the philosophers, I mean, I've got a book over there called The Animal Rights Crusade, and it talks about philosophers as the midwives of movements, right? But I think that our movement is not sophisticated enough to understand philosophical ideas. And so I think that Reagan and Singer both gave up on the movement, I think. I think that Singer kind of stopped complaining about people mislabeling him in the end. Although that clip that was in your film, Andy, was pretty new. And I think
it's not that old, not that old.
No, and then Reagan, for his part, I think when he had that split with Francione, I think he said, well, look, there's no point in us standing outside of the animal welfare movement. We agree that it's not really an animal rights movement. It's just, you just use rights rhetorically because they like the label, they like the name. But there's no point in standing outside of it. So Francione said, no, that's exactly what we should do. And Reagan said, no, I think we should work within it. I think that's kind of what happened. Benny, you've been quiet, but then I think it's your connection, really. But is there anything you want to add at this stage?
Yeah.
It's getting no better.
I can hear, but I think his camera stopped.
Kind of thing. The reason I found this article surprising was because
yeah, I'm sorry, Benny. Your connection is not letting you say a single sentence, I'm afraid. So this is why we're talking over you in the end.
On the article surprise.
Yeah. Very modulated, isn't it? And
really.
This is an interesting thing. A lot of people reduce animal rights,
especially things
right
like the
to welfare. Let's see if we can get Benny back. Do you want to maybe leave and come back again and see if that improves your connection, Benny. You want to try that? Because you're totally frozen, and then we hear about 3 words and then nothing. So
it's not communicating his message at all.
The Matrix has got Benny, it says here.
Yeah.
Benny's been matrixed.
I don't know what's happened. It's a shame.
Yeah, so this one is, you know, a lot of people reduce animal rights to the right to welfare, which is animal welfare and not animal rights. And so this goes back to the core fundamental difference between animal rights and animal welfare, which is that animal welfare is about improving things, the treatment of other animals whilst they're being used, which is what Francione says in your film, Andy. Whereas animal rights is a critique of their use completely, and it would rule out all animal use right across the board with no exceptions. Right? Animal welfare doesn't do that. In fact, animal welfare is about regulating the use, not abolishing it. And so this is why when modern day vegans start using cruelty language and abuse language, it creates those kind of problems that we've talked about, Andy, and you bring up all the time, in the sense that people think, oh, well, if cruelty is a problem, then we just need to look for what's not cruel. If abuse is a problem, we need to find out what's not abusive, right? When you talk to them about use, it's clear where you're coming from. That we see what they would tend to do then is go to the periphery and talk about guide dogs, or in North America, seeing eye dogs. You know, what about therapy? Other animals used in therapy, that kind of stuff. So they would try to go to the kind of edges of the idea, you know, which I suppose is just a technique that most people do. I mean, I suppose that's really
of course. One of the easiest ways that I find to do the stuff like that is, first of all, go vegan, and then we'll approach that subject together. Because, you know, as Reagan said, we need lots of different sensible minds that are looking at these situations going forward. So if you join us and be against all these other things that you can definitely stop right this second, right now, then things like guide dogs, we can look at that together moving forward. But at the moment, you're not doing anything. So until you reach at least this point, we'll talk about those other things first. But there's some more pressing issues that you're not doing anything about. And normally that's
right, people. The big announcement is Benny might be back.
Oh,
come on, Benny, you can do it, man. So let's see. Oh, he's smiling, so he can hear us. So
come back in and see if this works.
I'm just going to be quiet for a second. See whether Benny comes through.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I heard that.
Heard that. Yeah, that's about the only thing we've heard so far. Say something else. A second sentence, please, Benny.
I completely explained where moral rights come from. You know, it's a shame.
Oh, we can hear you better now. It seems like you're
Do you want
to
do that again? Because obviously it's a contested thing about, you know, where do rights come from. I kind of covered it in my PhD, but it's still a contested issue because a lot of people don't believe that rights exist, like Alex O'Connor, for example. And so, you know, to talk about, you know, where do they come from makes no sense, because he actually says, didn't he, in one of his interviews, well, obviously other animals don't have rights because I don't think rights exist. So trivially, they don't have rights. He put it in that kind of language. You know, I mean, if they don't exist, what's the point of arguing about whether a certain group of people have them or not? Mm-hmm. Go on, Benny. We'll stop talking and give you a little bit of space.
Yeah, I was joking about that, but where I worry they do come from is similar to what you were saying, Roger. You know, even if they're a fiction, it's the same for human rights. Wherever we think human rights come from, it's the idea of extending them anyway. So it is a kind of currency almost. amongst humans, and that it's a way of protecting what we see as the moral rights just being inherent by existing, really, and by being sentient. So if you can be harmed, it matters to you what happens to you. It's rights come from interest. And it's something we as humans decide, well, we're going to protect those interests.
Yeah,
That's the way I see it,
if
anyway.
yeah, okay. So if you say we as humans decide, so where does that answer the question? Where do they come from? Does that make sense for the sentence? So where do rights come from? We think that we can use them to protect, but where do they come from?
Asking me.
Well, I think that that's a really good question to answer, because I don't think anyone's really got a real grounding problem for where they come from.
No, I mean, sorry. No, the way that I normally explain it to people, you kind of touched on it a bit earlier, Roger, when you said whether they're divine or whether, I look at it kind of, if you believe in a God or any God, and so you're a creation, then your rights are God-given in that sense, if that's where your beliefs lie. Where for me, I understand evolution. So as far as I'm concerned, my rights come in the sense that I'm here, I exist, I have the right to be here. Same with all other species that have survived millions and millions of years of transitions to get where they are, to survive in their environment, to adapt, to reproduce, to do all of the things necessary. That's where their rights derive from. The fact that they're here. They don't need to be given by anyone. They've only ever been taken. They don't need to be given. They're always there. They always existed. And that would have extended no matter what our species was. Going all the way back. Because it's the right to exist. I don't think anyone has the right to give or take that away. It's just a natural right that you would have. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you've got to believe in evolution or God or any of those things. You can literally believe it as a fiction. There's plenty of companies that exist that have rights legally that obviously aren't a person. They're a fictional company, but no one questions it. So if you can believe in the rights of a company, just look at it this way. If you're driving down the road and a squirrel runs out, most people will swerve out the way. It's not illegal to drive over a squirrel. But they respect the squirrel's right to exist. Even at the most basic levels, they might make that connection because we're dealing with speciesism all the time. But at the most basic level, they respect the other's right to exist. And that's how most people see oppression as well. We'd never talk about racism as, can you reduce suffering? Or can we have racist less Mondays? We'd never see these kinds of oppression in this way. So it's speciesism, really, which is the problem. I don't think most people don't believe in rights. I think they do. I think they accept them, and that's wherever that belief derives from. I think they do. I think the problem is speciesism. It's where they direct that respect for those rights.
Yeah, well, going back to what you just said, it's interesting because my sister once got told off by a driving instructor because she did an emergency stop for a bird. And he said you shouldn't have done that because you could have endangered a human being. Right?
I asked the question when I had my driving lesson, Sharon, about it had to be bigger than a small dog to constitute stopping, as far as a driving instructor was concerned. Yeah.
All right. So if you stop for a dog, they would accept that.
Yeah. If it was a small dog that ran out in the road and potentially caused an accident, you could get away with that. If it was a squirrel, no.
Or a rhino.
Yeah, I think rhino would probably qualify. I think, to be fair, I think the rhino would stop you.
Now, Joanna said something interesting, which is very relevant to this, which is I unfollowed Alex O'Connor. But the thing about that is Alex O'Connor told the truth all the time as well. He basically said that he wasn't a vegan. So he's a little bit like Earthling Ed. They don't like the definition of veganism, so they change it and make it a kind of bit more militant version of the RSPCA. So it's to do with the reduction of suffering, and both of them say that over and over and over again. Nobody said anything to Alex O'Connor until he started talking about food, and nobody's going to say anything to Ed Winters until he starts talking about his fact he's eating cream cakes again or something. because their philosophical kind of opposition to veganism doesn't seem to be a controversy within the vegan community. Now, that to me is astounding, really, because they're basically saying, well, look, when it comes to veganism, we're reducitarians. We don't like veganism being, they don't even like the focus of veganism, right? Let alone the scope of veganism, which is another thing which would include the animals only people. But that they don't even come into that. That in terms of the actual definition that everybody adheres to, they didn't like that. And so O'Connor complained about the word exploitation. He didn't particularly even like the word cruelty, I don't think. He preferred a reduction of suffering. Yeah. And what Ed says is a reduction of suffering to the greatest extent possible. So he'll bring in that practicable and possible part of it, but transfer it onto suffering, And so they're messing around with an already weak definition of veganism to suit their own personal thing. And nobody is complaining. Nobody is actually saying to Ed, hang on a second, in terms of the definition, do you agree with it? Because he's going to say no, I don't like that word. I don't like this word. Exactly what O'Connor said. And so Earthling Ed is being honest. Alex O'Connor has been honest, and Peter Singer has been honest. It's just that our movement doesn't seem to either understand that or make anything of it. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? It's
yeah, absolutely. Like, if you take what Alex said at word.
Let's see if we can get Benny to say something.
Yeah, I'll be quiet.
Yeah, sorry, Andy. I was just going to say, I want to associate for vegans and for more animal rights people that we are the ones that project that onto them. They're the ones that are being honest, saying, I'm not animal rights, I'm not actually vegan. But it's the same with celebrities. We jack onto them, we say, oh, they're vegan, when they're actually just plant-based.
Yeah, that actually is a very good point in terms of Tobias Leonhardt, because he used to give a talk where this is when Bill Clinton was a celebrity vegan. And of course, it was known that Bill Clinton used to eat other animals, particularly I think he used to eat salmon, but he definitely ate tuna, right? And so he would say to his audience, well, look, people say that Bill Clinton's not a vegan. Why is that? And somebody from the audience said, because he eats tuna. And so Leonhardt goes, yeah. But can you see the benefit of that? In other words, Bill Clinton being regarded as a vegan. And the guy came back and he said, what, to the tuna? And he just kind of reddened up and put his head down because he'd kind of been caught out by that animal rights thing. Because Leonhardt's position was always based on trying to get vegans to say that they would eat other animals in certain circumstances, right? These kind of hypotheticals, we like hypotheticals, don't we, Andy?
But some of his hypotheticals are like, I don't even know how you've conjured up this situation ever. I mean, the being stuck on a desert island that the non-vegans offer us, that's really sensible in comparison to some of the things he can conjure up. It's crazy, but yeah. No, but I mean, if you were to take Alex O'Connor's definition or even Ed's, and look at it as reducing suffering as far as possible, then Alex O'Connor would still qualify. Because he's still against factory farming, he's still against industrialized abuse, as he put it, and against all these other things. He's just conceded that he now, every so often, consumes fish or sea life. So as far as his definition goes, reducing suffering as far as is possible for him, he is doing that.
Okay, so let's go to this thing. I mentioned this to you earlier, Andy, that one of the things that Leonhardt would point out was there used to be a Facebook page called "This is the smallest Facebook group in the world. If you try and join, I'll kick you out." Right. And he said that this is like the vegan movement. That if we currently define veganism as not eating other animals, that's going to make the entry to veganism too hard. And so, you know, I think he used a pole vaulting kind of analogy that you can either work harder to get over the bar, or the other way of doing it is to lower the bar. And so his strategy was to lower the bar, which means then that you have a bigger vegan movement, because you've got vegans who eat eggs. Somebody came up with the idea of lactose vegan at one point. Somebody came up with the idea of a vegan before 6. You know, these kind of ideas, right? These kind of reducitarian ideas, and they would say then that it's much more movement building to lower the entry fee into veganism. And so with some people, they would redefine veganism to mean vegetarianism. And with someone like Leonard, he would, because he famously said that someone who eats fishes is vegan as far as I'm concerned, right? And so you then start to get these kind of gradients into which other animals in which circumstances can be eaten, and you can still regard yourself as vegan, right? And so with someone like O'Connor, it was the elk situation, wasn't it? Where it might be better to shoot the elk. That's when he was talking to Michaela Peterson, woman. Is it Patterson? Peterson, yeah. Yeah. And so there's been a lot of people trying to kind of shift things around. And I think it might be on the grounds that you've got a bit of frustration that the movement isn't growing big enough, and then thinking, well, the idea then would be to make it easier to join it. And that is true, isn't it? I mean, that logically is a true thing to do. The question is it still veganism?
Well,
and I got
no.
no.
I mean, it's kind of like going back to the Facebook group.
Or vegans.
Sorry, carry on. Now go. Whilst you can speak, Benny, you speak.
Go ahead, Andy.
I was just going to say, I mean, it goes back to the group.
You could have a million.
Poor Benny. This is.
I know, it's such a shame.
Right, another fundraiser. We want an internet connection for Benny Malone, for God's sake.
But you know, I mean, even these basic Facebook groups, right? They've got rules that you've got to agree to before they let you in. Some of them have got 3 or 4 questions. In fact, you've got to, well, are you against depression? If that answer's not, you know, if it doesn't qualify, you're not in the group. It's not, well, let's just lower the rules and let anyone in. You could say that about anything. Why don't Amazon just employ everyone? I mean, everyone will get much less wages, but why don't they just open the doors and let everyone have a job? It's that simple. Because they don't. Literally, it's a movement that's a social justice movement. So if you're not for and against the things that we're for and against, you're excluded. Sorry. In the same reason that I'm not going to be allowed to go and, I don't know, if I turn up at Benny's band practice and they go, what can you play? Nothing. Well, I'm still in the band, though. I want to be. Why can't I be? Equal opportunities and all that. Fuck it, I want to be. No, you don't qualify. You don't meet the criteria. I'm sorry. You know,
you'll probably get in. The rest of the band will go, oh, that's the same as us. In you come.
But that's it. You can't just turn up for something and go, well, I want to be part of this. You should lower the boundaries for me. No. You know, but also, go and be a vegetarian. Go and be a flexitarian. Go and be go and fit one of those other groups.
That's my position. It's not as though there's not other words to use and other positions to adopt. Yeah. But the idea of kind of asking the vegans to do the non-vegan stuff is the bit that I always object to, because there's such few of us already. There's such few of us in the minority that are active, and yet the vegetarians want us to do their heavy lifting for us, and then the reducitarians want us to do their heavy lifting. Now, I think the reason for that is that they recognize that of all those 3 communities, if you think of reducitarian, vegetarian, vegan, it's in the vegan category where you've got the activists. And I think they recognize that. I mean, like, how many vegetarian activists do you see on the streets? How many reducitarian activists do you see doing a stall, right? So you don't see it. And so I think this is why they try to co-opt the vegans to do non-vegan stuff. It's exactly the same as when people call for unity between welfarists and rightists. What they mean is that is translated to, please, rightists, you do some welfare for us, because we're not going to do any right stuff because we're welfarists. So we're asking you to do welfare. That's the way it always works, you know. And it's done that for years and years and years. So it's a kind of real shame. Right. Well, we're just on an hour. Do we want to keep it neat, or have we got anything else to say?
I mean, the only thing I'd add on that whole conversation we was just having is, why doesn't Tobias go and do this as like proof of concept? Why doesn't he go and get loads and loads and loads of non-vegan, so to speak, to go vegetarian first, using that logic, prove that it works, and then you've got, using his version, a much bigger step. Then you've already taken that step. You've got proof of concept, and then you've only got to bridge that gap between vegetarianism and vegan. Why doesn't he do that? Why is he focusing? Why is it always vegans that is who he wants as his audience? Why is he trying to regress this movement as opposed to progressing that movement? Why doesn't he just go a few steps back? If that's his approach, and that obviously is his personality and those are his beliefs, whatever, but just go back 2 or 3 steps and start bringing people forward, rather than people who are potentially here trying to take them back all the time, which is what he's doing.
Well, there is this interesting, though, because I mean, I agree with what Deb is saying here very, very much. The fact that if we seem more wobbly, why are going to people kind of almost like take us seriously? What Leonard would say was, he used this analogy with celiacs and the gluten intolerant, and he was saying that there are a small number of celiacs, and the reason that they've got many more products now which are suitable for them is because of the gluten intolerant people who go in and say, have you got anything gluten free, right? And like they are gluten intolerant, so they wouldn't kind of die, whereas the celiacs would. And so because of the larger number of, you know, and so the argument translates to us by saying, if we've got lots of flexitarians going in asking for plant-based this, that, and the other, it's going to mean that there's going to be a lot of plant-based this, that, and the other in the shops, and that's going to benefit the vegans. Now, I've got no problem with that particular idea. It's just that you don't call the reducitarians going into the supermarket asking for plant-based options vegans. That's all. We just, you know, in this sense, staying in your lane makes sense. And in terms of the size of the movement, I mean, just think if you talked about a Facebook group. If there's a human rights Facebook group and you've got those questions to get entry into it, you know, how many times do you do X, you know, human rights violation? How many times do you do that? And if you go, oh, well, you know, I'm cutting down and all, you know, it would
I'm on my journey. I'm on my journey.
Yeah, it'd become absurd, wouldn't it? It'd be the Francione thing about, well, you know, I do have slaves, but I don't hit them very often. You know, I do abuse women, but I don't involve battery. It's just coercion, and it's a little bit of domestic violence now and again. If you were to put virtually everything that happens in this movement and translate into that was happening in the human rights movement, including that the leading philosopher of the human rights movement didn't believe in human rights, it would look like a very strange movement. And I think the news for us is that for a lot of other movements, they look at our movement and they think, what the hell is this? Because there's not much of our movement that makes sense to us. We're not very political. We're not very consistent. We're all over the place with our claims. We don't really know what we're trying to say. We're all kind of wishy-washy and wobbly and everything. And they go, well, no, thanks to making alliances with you lot. I mean, I think a lot of other movements think that the animal rights movement is absurd. And I think this is why a lot of radical people who joined the animal rights movement or was in it already have now left, because they can't operate in such a, what's the word I'm looking at, kind of floppy movement. You know, we haven't sorted ourselves out. Our leading philosopher doesn't believe in animal rights, and yet we call it the animal rights movement. You know, again, just think on that, just one thing. If the leading philosopher of the human rights movement, as such, if it existed, as it were, didn't believe in human rights, it would be seen as absurd, right? But that is actually the situation in our movement.
Yeah.
So, right, people. I suppose we ought to end it there before I go into any more silly rants. So I'm looking for an ending, but I haven't got one because we haven't got any things for this. So we're just gonna have to turn it off. So we're gonna have to look a bit daft and just wave,
That's fine.
Bye, ladies and gentlemen. Bye.
See you
Something like
later,
that.
everyone.
So,
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Now, sorry about your connection, Benny. It would have been great.
Oh, yeah,
to
sorry about that, everyone.
Yeah, no, I'm not complaining. I'm just thinking it'd be great to have had more of your input, but especially since you were the one who prompted this live in the first place, because we weren't even going to do it.
It's been better since you managed to come back on. Yeah, not as bad as it was at the beginning.
I'll
It
write
has been,
something.
You're right. So, oh, right, okay, yeah, and then we can invite you on, and you can read it out, and we won't be able to hear you. That's what we'll do.
Just pull it up.
Okay, people, we'll see you again. I'm back on. Well, we've got the panel on TikTok tomorrow, Andy, at 8 o'clock.
8 o'clock, yeah.
I was
If
thinking
you're not doing anything with your evening, you can go and watch my film. It's 45 minutes. It won't take you long. You might learn something. Enjoy.
Yes, absolutely. You saw a little clip of it. That was a teaser. That was a teaser for it. Just for you. I think everybody's saying cheers, bye all, and all that kind of stuff. All right, so everybody's saying goodbye to us, so we better go. Okay, people.
See you later.
Thanks a lot. Catch you later.